Committee on Oversight and Government Reform will come to order, and without objection, the Chair is authorized to declare a recess at any time. I appreciate all of you joining us for this hearing today. Secure immigration identity documents. For nearly 150 years, the Government Printing Office, otherwise known as the GPO, has served as the printer for the Congress and the Federal Government. In that capacity, it is responsible for the collection, production, distribution, and preservation of public information from 3 branches of government. As government records move from print to digital, GPO finds itself in a challenge to remain relevant and necessary. With declining print demands, GPO is projected to run out of money in 2020 unless it overhauls its current business model. In 2013, the National Academy of Public Administration, or NAPA, conducted a review of the state of GPO and its ability to meet the digital demands of the future. NAPA found that all the facets of the GPO will need to be realigned, everything from GPO's digital publishing and preservation efforts to the size and skill set of its workforce will need to be reevaluated. One major change to its business model involves GPO supplying secure credentials containing radio frequency identification, often referred to as RFID. These chips to government agencies handling our nation's immigration functions. GPO now issues those. It is unclear, however, if those documents are both secure and functional. Ensuring that identity documents are secure and reliable is critical to our national security. Immigration fraud was identified by the 9/11 Commission as a key method by which terrorists entered and remained in the United States. As important as weapons. It went on to say, at many entry points to vulnerable facilities, including gates for boarding aircraft, sources of identification are the last opportunity to ensure that people are who they say they are, end quote. Given these facts, it is critical that secure credentials reflect the state-of-the-art technology to ensure Federal Government is a step ahead of those who would attempt to alter or misuse documents to commit terrorist or criminal acts. The Federal Acquisition System is built on the principle of full and open competition. Full and open competition means contractors compete against each other on both the quality and the solution and the price. This ultimately benefits the American taxpayer and, I believe, provides a better end product. Essentially, the Federal departments and agencies can circumvent the full and open competition process and sole source their secure credential requirements to the GPO. This means that the American taxpayer does not realize the benefit of innovation and the best price through a full and open competition process. It also means the government forfeits the opportunity to leverage innovative solutions to ensure reliable and security of those credentials. It also appears GPO is increasingly shifting towards in-house production of credentials. Now, if they offer the best product, the best price, more power to them. But without that competition, worried that over the course of time, that security, that innovation, that it will suffer. Typically, an agency seeking to contract with the private sector for a good or service must comply with the Federal Acquisition Regulations, or FAR. The agency would publish a request for a proposal and receive bids from potential contractors in response. Then the agency has the opportunity to evaluate solutions and the price offered by several contractors. This process of full and open competition is intended to make sure the agency is getting the best product at the lowest price. GPO claims that its 47-year-old authorizing statute, Title 44, justifies its ability to issue secure credentials in this matter simply because these cards have print on them, and printing is a core GPO function. In particular, GPO has argued that, quote, the production of secure credentials for a federal agency also involves the printing process, and so GPO is authorized to produce them, end quote. This raises the question of whether Title 44 should be used in the competition process to acquire secure credentials from GPO. GPO certainly knows how to print, but do they have the capacity and to innovate and provide reliable, secure credentials? This is part of the discussion today. I thank all the witnesses for their expertise in being here today and look for the most important topic. We'll now recognize the ranking member, Mr. Conley of Virginia, for his opening statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and welcome to our panelists. I welcome the opportunity to examine more closely the government's procurement and production of secure identification cards. Today, most people take for granted the necessity of carrying around some form of official credential, whether it's a passport, driver's license, employer-issued ID, or, if you're a member of this body, your voting card. Thanks to technological advances in recent years, some of these cards now digitally store personal information, which makes the integrity of the cards themselves and those involved in the manufacturing to create them critically important. It also strikes me as a prime opportunity for the public sector, which increasingly relies on these smart cards, to partner with industry, which is continually advancing the sophistication of the security as well as the applications for this technology through innovation and research. I would suggest the Government Publishing Office, which is statutorily tasked with serving the printing needs for all three branches of the Federal Government, has been successful in fostering such a partnership with industry on developing the modern U.S. passport, which it produces for the Department of State using paper and electronic components competitively procured from private sector vendors. Based on that experience and growing interest from Federal agencies for secure credentials, GPO requested and was granted authority by the Joint Committee on Printing, comprised of members of Congress, to begin producing secure cards, beginning with the credentials for the Trusted Traveler programs for U.S. Customs and Border Protection under the Department of Homeland Security. More recently, GPO took over the production of the Border Crossing Card for the State Department at the agency's request. One of the companies represented today, Morpheus Trust, at one time printed those cards, but the State Department determined GPO could produce them with a more reliable re-rate at a lower cost. While the production of the physical cards transitioned to GPO, I understand Morpho remains the lead contractor for imprinting the personalized information on each card. Mr. Chairman, I must say I was puzzled to read the prepared statements from today's industry witnesses in preparing for this hearing. For example, Ms. Carroll, who represents HID Global, an international company that prints the U.S. government issue green card and passports for 25 other countries, as well as our member voting cards and secure IDs for congressional staff, says industry is threatened by GPO's expanded role in producing smart cards. Further, Mr. Albers of Morpho Trust, the U.S. subsidiary of a multinational company which partners with GPO on producing U.S. passports and prints the driver's license for 42 of 50 states, suggests GPO's actions represent an existential crisis for industry and its partnership with the Federal Government. Last time I checked, Congress provides GPO with a budget for printing and binding of roughly $80 million. While it does engage in printing and manufacturing of secure cards, separate from the passport, it is on a limited basis, utilizing just 27 employees. Production of secure cards accounts for 4% of GPO's revenue, roughly $30 million, representing a mere fraction of the multi-billion-dollar global secure card market. GPO does not actively compete with industry through the agency procurement process, responding only to direct agency requests. I understand industry representatives may be concerned that such intergovernment arrangements hinder competition. But I would note that GPO often turns to industry to competitively procure products to meet those needs. Further, I'd suggest that we ought to be more agnostic about whether this work is best performed by government or private sector, and I think you expressed that, Mr. Chairman, just now, about whether this work is best performed by government, private sector, and instead consider which can meet agency needs for a quality product with the best cost. When I was chairman of Fairfax County, we explored opportunities to outsource several government functions. And I can recall having my auditor look into potential savings of outsourcing vehicle fleet maintenance. I was convinced the private sector could do that more cheaply and probably at better quality. To my surprise, the government actually came in cheaper than Jiffy Lube, and the customer satisfaction was universally positive. I was surprised. My preconceived notion was in fact wrong. So, in the case of smart cards, the few agencies that turn to GPO have in fact reported savings, as GPO is only allowed to recoup its costs and does not make a profit. Those agencies also may cancel their agreement with GPO at any time without penalty if they find an industry partner that can produce a more reliable card and more cheaply. In addition, I would note this finding from the GAO, which notes GPO, quote, does not have the capacity to meet the entirety of the Federal Government demand for secure credentials, either through direct production in its facilities or by contracting outside entities to fulfill a requisition. So even if GPO wanted to expand its secure card business, as our witnesses suggest is the case, it could not do so. Let me go back to what I said at the outset. This should be a textbook opportunity for government to better collaborate with industry. We wouldn't have this capability if not for the ingenuity of industry, which has responded to both the public and private sector needs for technologically advanced secure ID cards. At the federal level, GPO, as the printer of the U.S. passport since 1926, has a role to play in this discussion, albeit a small one, as do other federal agencies that rely on industry to be a partner in providing those essential services. I look forward to the hearing. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank the gentleman. We'll hold the record open for 5 legislative days for any members who would like to submit a written statement. We'll now recognize our witnesses. We're pleased to welcome Ms. Davida Vance Cooks, Director of the Government Publishing Office, the GPO, Ms. Kathleen Carroll, Vice President of Corporate Affairs at HID Global, Mr. James Albers, Senior Vice President of Government Operations at Morpho Trust USA, and Mr. Michael Raponi, did I pronounce that right? Inspector General of the Government Publishing Office. We welcome you all. Pursuant to committee rules, all witnesses are to be sworn before they testify. So if you will please rise and raise your right hand. Please rise and raise your right hands. Thank you. Do you solemnly swear or affirm that the testimony you're about to give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? Thank you. Please be seated and let the record reflect that the witnesses all answered in the affirmative. Your entire written statement will be entered into the record. We're now going to recognize you for your verbal comments, but if you could please limit those to 5 minutes, we would appreciate it, and then we'll get to the questions. Director Vance Cooks, you're now recognized for 5 minutes.
Mr. Chairman and members of the committee, good morning. I have been looking forward to this opportunity to showcase the important secure credential work that the GPO performs on behalf of federal agencies and our U.S. citizens. As you have asked, I will briefly summarize my prepared remarks which have been submitted for the record. The GPO has produced the U.S. passports since 1926. Giving us extensive experience in the important field of secure credentials. A decade ago, in partnership with State, we developed the e-passport, which contains multiple physical and digital security features. And since then, we have produced over 100 million e-passports. Based on this experience, in 2007, the Joint Committee on Printing, our oversight committee, approved our request to fund a capability to produce secure credentials for federal agencies that were asking us for these solutions. In 2012, the JCP approved our request to fund the establishment of a secure credential COOP site. The JCP, our oversight committee, has overseen and approved funding for this program throughout its existence. Our role in building secure identity documents is to provide federal government agencies with an option for a government-to-government solution backed by competitive outsourcing with the private sector. We are a choice, and the agencies are not required to use us. We are a printer and a card integrator. We produce secure credentials by using qualified expert staff working in an ISO 9001 certified manufacturing operation, backed by a COOP facility, supported by a secure supply chain with access to both federal and commercial experts in fraudulent document testing and forensic labs. In our partnerships with the private sector, we outsource our requirements for consulting, design, equipment, materials, and supplies, and fabrication, so that we can produce secure credentials with cutting-edge security technologies. Our partnerships with the private sector creates hundreds of jobs and provides multiple business opportunities. To date, the GPO has produced over 9 million secure credential cards across 15 separate product lines. Among these products are the Trusted Traveler Program cards, the Border Crossing cards, and the TWIC cards. And our customers are highly satisfied with GPO's product performance, reliability, security, and pricing. Our secure credential operation is relatively modest in size. Total program revenues for FY14 approximately $30 million, representing 4% of GPO's revenue. The secure credential operation is an authorized GPO function as outlined by Title 44, which defines printing and the requisition process. And that requisition process triggers competitive procurement outsourcing throughout the secure credential industry. And by law, the GPO can only recover its costs. So there are no profits, there are no shareholder margins, resulting in significant taxpayer savings. We operate under multiple layers of oversight and review, including our IG office. Our finances are independently audited by KPMG every year. In the last 3 years, at the request of Congress, we have been audited by NAPA and the GAO, and they have validated our mission. We are open and transparent. In conclusion, we are proud that the program is helping to keep our borders and our facilities secure. Our employees are so proud to print these products. We're proud to serve our country, and I invite you all to come down and see our secure credential operation. Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, thank you again for this opportunity.
Thank you. Ms. Carroll, you're now recognized for 5 minutes.
Ranking Member Conley and other distinguished members of the committee, thank you for inviting me to testify today. My name is Kathleen Carroll, and I am the Vice President of Corporate Affairs at HID Global, where I focus on the intersection of technology, security, privacy, and public policy. I am honored to be able to share with you our concerns regarding the manufacture and procurement of secure documents. For more than 25 years, HID Global has been designing, developing, and manufacturing secure credentials for private businesses and governments around the world, including the U.S. Green Card. In fact, as Congressman noted, we do make the Congressional Homeland Security has certified our Austin, Texas facility for the manufacture of these credentials for the U.S. government. A simple, easy-to-replicate card can certainly be made by untrained people with readily available equipment. A complex, hard-to-replicate, reliable card is actually very difficult to make. What is often forgotten in discussions like this is that a secure identity document is part of an ecosystem that includes readers, software, databases, and processes to authenticate and verify such critical documents. All of these components must work together securely, seamlessly, consistently, and in a privacy-protecting manner. Congress needs to decide whether these systems, which are the first line of defense at the border, require and deserve the innovation and investment that can only come from the private sector. This is why companies like HID Global exist. That is why the HID-made U.S. Green Card has consistently been considered the hardest to counterfeit government-issued identity document. The Green Card has both physical card security and an extremely reliable RFID read rate. Congress created programs like the Green Card and the Border Crossing Card and mandated them for a reason, to secure the border. We are proud of the jobs we create and the technology we develop to help you do that, and we can hope to continue doing so in the future. Our ability to do so, however, is threatened by the Government Publishing Office's decision to become a manufacturer of secure credentials. With no legislative direction or authority from Congress, the GPO, a government entity, has broadly interpreted its mandate under Title 44 to manufacture ID cards and plastic data pages for passports. The GPO also aggressively markets its manufacturing services to executive branch agencies with the claim that it is the sole legal source of these ID cards. The evidence shows that the GPO doesn't really intend to compete at all. They instead inform executive branch agencies that they are required to obtain ID cards from the GPO under Title 44. The GPO began asserting this in 2007. We were part of a team of private industry vendors who spent months developing cutting-edge secure identity documents for the Consolidated Trusted Traveler RFID card program. Late in the procurement process, we were abruptly informed by letter that the GPO would provide the cards. The letter cited Title 44. More recently, we were re-awarded the contract to manufacture the U.S. green card under a competitive bidding process with other private manufacturers. That competition almost didn't happen. We learned that the GPO had been having conversations with USCIS for months prior to the release of the most recent request for purchase. It is our understanding that the GPO was asserting that USCIS could avoid the rigorous process of conducting a competitive bid and instead simply request the green card be awarded to GPO under Title 44. Congress needs to decide if your goal is to have the best, most advanced secure credential technology to protect the border. If so, you need to insist that agencies should buy the best and most secure credentials from those of us in industry that have invested millions of dollars in innovation, expertise, and security. The GPO does not have the incentive or the capability to manufacture or even effectively develop the technologies offered by the private sector. It seems the threshold question Congress should be asking is, how do we make our government-issued credentials used to gain entry into the United States as secure as possible? Not, how do we ensure that the GPO or any other entity that wants to enter the market to manufacture credentials can do so? The decision to manufacture secure immigration documents should not be left up to the GPO. For the sake of our national security, Congress should determine the best path forward. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Albers, you're now recognized for 5 minutes.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
can I just say to Ms. Carroll, I thank you for the voter ID cards you produce, and I just hope we can persuade airports and TSA to accept them as a valid form of ID. Thank you.
If you need some help, I'll try to help.
Mr. Albers, you're now recognized for 5 minutes.
Good morning, Chairman Chaffetz, Ranking Member Conley, other distinguished members of the committee. Thank you for inviting me to testify today. My name is Jim Albers, and I'm the Senior Vice President of Government Operations for Morpho Trust USA. Morpho Trust employs over 1,600 employees in the United States. All of our employees are cleared U.S. citizens, and all of our secure production facilities are located in the United States. Morpho Trust produces 80% of the driver's licenses and IDs in this country, the most widely used document for establishing identity. We have been the prime contractor on the State Department's passport personalization contract for 20 years. I'd like to use this opportunity to talk about the industry, the importance of competition as it relates to price and innovation, and ultimately the security of the country. Private industry's ability to compete for contracts for federal secure credentials is threatened by the Government Publishing Office's unique claims under Title 44. In 2008, following a competitive procurement, Morpho Trust was awarded a contract with the U.S. Department of State to produce the U.S. passport card as well as the border crossing card. Under this contract, we produced over 1 million RFID-enabled secure credentials per year. In 2012, we learned through indirect sources that the GPO would now be producing the border crossing card. There was no public notice, no RFI, no RFP, no opportunity for other suppliers to compete for this business. After a formal inquiry, we received a letter from the State Department's Office of Competition Advocate stating that they were required to use GPO for the production of secure credentials as it falls within the definition of printing under Title 44. There is a belief that the GPO enjoys a loophole from the federal acquisition regulations under the guise of Title 44, which requires that all printing be done by or through the GPO. The GPO is using this to procure without facing the free and open competition any private vendor would face. A lack of competition in industry will have a direct impact on national security by driving private suppliers and the innovations that they bring out of the business and make it more difficult for America to stay one step ahead of the counterfeiters and the would-be terrorists. Production of secure credentials involves complex manufacturing processes that extend well beyond printing. These processes rely on persistent innovation and allow U.S. industry to design and produce some of the most sophisticated and secure credentials in the world. However, as we look at the competitive landscape, we believe that this industry's existence is threatened by the fact that GPO continues to grow large-scale production capability for the production of identity documents. Our economic system depends and only works well when there is competition. When you remove competition, you destroy capitalism. Competition drives innovation. Morphotrust invests millions of dollars per year in internal R&D funds. We do this for two reasons. Number one, to stay ahead of the bad guys, and number two, to stay ahead of the competition. If the government decided to send all its secure credential design, development, and manufacturing to GPO, industry would no longer have an incentive to invest. As a side note, when we do mess up, industry bears the costs of these mistakes. When government messes up, the taxpayers bear the cost. Competition drives down prices. As my friend right here, Kathleen, works for a competitor, sometimes Morphotrusts may partner with HID and sometimes we may compete. Regardless, we both work hard to win. In a recent competition that Kathleen mentioned between our two companies, HID won the DHS Green Card Award over Morphotrust, with both companies drastically cutting prices over the current price, saving the government millions of dollars. Congratulations. National security is not being served by Title 44. While there were secure credentials prior to 9/11, those terrorist attacks on our soil highlighted the need for better identity documents. As the chairman already mentioned, the 9/11 Commission reported, for terrorists, travel documents are as important as weapons. In conclusion, in order to maintain a competitive industrial base, encourage competition and innovation, and keep one step ahead of the bad guys, it is time for Congress to reform Title 44. Doing so will clarify the authority of agencies to procure the production of secure credentials directly from the private sector. Only in this way will the United States government secure and ensure the quality assurance, technological innovation, and cost efficiencies associated with robust private sector competition. Thank you for your time. I look forward to your questions.
Thank you. We'll now hear from the Inspector General, Mr. Raponi, for 5 minutes. You're now recognized.
Good morning, Chairman Chaffetz, Ranking Member Connolly, and members of the committee. Thank you for the opportunity to testify on the oversight work of the Office of Inspector General as it pertains to secure credentials issued by the Government Publishing Office. As you are aware, the OIG is an independent entity within the GPO. Therefore, the views expressed in my testimony are based on the findings and the recommendations of the OIG and not intended to reflect GPO's position. By way of background, GPO produces federal secure credentials in accordance with its mandate under Title 44 of the U.S. Code to fulfill the printing needs of the federal government. According to GPO officials, production of secure credentials fall within the statutory definition of printing. We noted congressional support of GPO's production of secure credentials when in December 2007, the Joint Committee on Printing authorized expenditures associated with smart card technology. And again in 2012, when it authorized expenditures associated with the establishment of a COOP capability for GPO's secure card production located in Stennis Space Center facility in Mississippi. We also noted in 2015, the Government Accountability Office reported its views of activities and processes related to GPO's production of secure credentials. In its report, GAO reported that both Department of State and Customs and Border Protection officials believed that after consideration of factors such as interagency coordination and collaboration in pricing, among others, GPO was best able to meet their production needs. OIG has issued 10 reports since 2012. OIG reports are intended to help senior managers strengthen operations. Our assessments disclose that GPO has established an overall framework of policies and management controls it uses to produce secure credentials. While an established structure is present, we noted opportunities exist to strengthen some activities and processes. For the purpose of this hearing, I will highlight examples from 4 audits. In August 2014, as part of an anonymous hotline complaint expressing concerns over acquisition of passport e-covers, OIG reviewed key factors used to determine whether a proposal was technically acceptable when GPO procured the most recent passport e-covers. In that review, we found documentation was not sufficient to demonstrate all key evaluation factors were performed, reviewed, and approved by the contracting officer. We also identified an issue that pertained to inconsistencies with the disposition of test results. Management agreed with our recommendations and took or is in the process of taking corrective action. In September 2014, OIG reported on the steps GPO took for ensuring accountability over blank e-passports through various stages of the production process. By way of computer chips, we traced and analyzed more than 2.4 million e-covers through the production process to final destination at state. In part, we found GPO could strengthen accountability by better documenting the physical destruction of e-covers and blank e-passports at its Stennis facility. Management agreed with the recommendations and took or is in the process of corrective action. In December 2014, based on concerns raised by the Committee on House Administration, OIG conducted a review and reported on whether GPO identified and addressed risks necessary to protect itself in the event a key component of blank e-passports were either compromised or had its supply chain threatened. OIG found that while significant improvements were made compared to results of an earlier review, procedures for ensuring the security of the supply chain were not always followed. OIG also identified a risk associated with sole source providers for key components of the supply chain, and management agreed with our recommendations and took or is in the process of taking corrective action. In my final example, GPO reported that the Secure Credential Production System developed to produce the Transportation Worker Identification Card, TWIC, failed to produce data as expected. GPO management requested OIG review the matter. In response, OIG analyzed the steps taken to develop the Secure Credential Production System, focusing on whether risks were adequately mitigated during the system development. We found GPO has taken numerous steps to establish an overall system development policy to follow when introducing new products. GPO has integrated its system development policy into key IT policies. In examining the activities associated with the development of the TWIC system, we found in general the framework for managing projects was not followed for approximately 60% of the tasks. Management agreed with the recommendations and has taken or in the process of taking corrective action. In conclusion, since 2012, OIG has made total 34 recommendations, of which 22 are closed and the remaining 12 are open and pending further verification. OIG is not aware of any current security breaches of the supply chain affecting GPO's production of secure credentials. We continue to work collaboratively with GPO to improve operations, maintain a long-standing record in delivering a world-class service to our nation. Thank you for the opportunity to testify today, and I'd be pleased to answer any questions that you or any members of the committee may have.
Thank you. We'll now recognize the gentleman from Florida, Mr. Mica, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and appreciate your calling this hearing. You expressed a lot of pride, Ms. Vance Cooks, in what you're doing, but I can tell you as far as credentialing and IDs, I have never seen a more screwed up program in my entire life. Our ranking member, Mr. Connolly, made a joke about our ID being able to use it as an identification like it at the airport. You produce the passports, or you're responsible for the passports?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. Well, after 9/11, just a little history, I called in the State Department because they were producing passports, and that was one of our most important documents that government was producing at that time. We said we should have some uniform standards for credentialing and be able to verify who has the passport or the identification, whether it be a passport, whether it be a member's card, or any other form of federal identification. Today, we still don't have that. The TWIC card is I'd be ashamed to come and say I had anything to do with the TWIC card. We've probably spent $1 billion. We've issued millions of them. And the TWIC card, which is Transportation Worker Identification Card, we have a document, don't we, a TWIC card? And we're on our second issuance of them, right? At least?
The GPO is responsible for the TWIC card. This is the first time we have produced the TWIC card.
I know, but again, does it have identifiable, verifiable information in it now, finally?
Yes.
With both thumb and iris?
I believe it does it? No, it does not.
Oh,
Sorry.
if you don't know that and come here, that's sad, and you're in charge of it. But it doesn't have it. It's unbelievable. Again, and we force people to take it. Now, if you go to a port, they show their TWIC card, they have to show another form of identification. It is not verifiable. I held no less than 3 hearings, and it's not all your fault. Part of it is Congress's fault. They've gone in different directions. This is a useless document. That's a member card, except for charging trillions of dollars on it when we vote. But it's unbelievable. The pilot card, I put 3 times in law that it must have identity verification, a strip that would contain basic information as to who that person was. They produced it, folks. You should see it. It was the biggest joke in the world. They used a pilot's identification getting into the aircraft, past security and everything. It looked like it came out of a Cracker Jack box. It was a folded little paper ID. And I said it had to be durable. It had to have embedded in it the information, and then it had to have a picture of the pilot. I'll be damned if they didn't produce it. There's much more information on my American Express card than they had on the pilot card. No verification, you're not going to touch my, especially with your reputation on that side of the aisle. I'll let you play with this one a while. But the only photo on the pilot's license was Wilbur and Orville Wright. It was a national joke and disgrace. But the TWIC card in particular is still a fiasco. Do we have a reader that can read a TWIC card?
Yes.
Approved?
Yes, and
How many ports is it deployed to?
I will have to check.
Oh, I'm telling you, I could probably count them on my fingers and toes.
All right.
It's a disgrace. And even if you had a reader, it doesn't have the information to verify. Fingerprint can be played with. Iris is the most dependable. And you said, Ms. Carroll, you must be able to verify the information with a reader, right? And the private sector has done this, haven't they?
Yes, sir.
They produce cards with that kind of information. We have security at different facilities, both in the private sector and the public sector that can do that, right?
Yes, sir.
So, and you've heard what they've just told us here about the fiasco of this. And it's not all her fault. I don't want to blame, I give you 70% of the credit
about
and 30% of the blame.
All right.
Part of it is Congress, and we do need to change Title 44. It's got to be changed. Somebody has to be in charge. First, you get a standard, a basic standard, and the private sector has done it over and over. And you have to have verifiable information embedded in that card, period. And then you have to have something that can read the damn card. So unless you get that in place, we are just, and this is, guys, this is a multi-billion-dollar fiasco. I yield back.
I thank the gentleman. Now recognize Mr. Conley of Virginia for 5 minutes.
I thank the chair. I really think this hearing seems to be about whether it's appropriate to have GPO in this function at all. And I think that's a fair question. I do think, Mr. Albers, you overstate your case. I hardly think GPO represents an existential threat to the industry. How big is your company?
Our company's about, Morpho Trust is about $650 million a year.
Right, and they're talking about $30 million. I suppose you could argue, and maybe if I were rewriting your testimony, I might make this argument that what they're doing is the camel's nose under the tent, and that is of concern, because if that grows, if everybody decides we're not going to go the competitive RFP route, we're just going to go the convenient route and contract directly with GPO, you lose out in a lot of business, and so does Ms. Carroll. Fair point. And let me ask you, Ms. Vance Cooks, what about the argument Mr. Albers and Ms. Carroll essentially put to us, which is that you're using, and federal agencies like State Department are using Title 44 as a loophole from the normal FAR process to essentially give you a sole source contract that eliminates the possibility of private sector competition and quality in that equation?
Thank you for the question. Title 44 basically simply states that we have the authority to make the secure credential card because it is, in fact, a printed product, and it's a printed product as defined by Title 44. However, they are making the assumption that we are forcing the federal agencies to come to us.
Nope. Nope, they didn't make that argument.
They are saying—
That's really not at all what Mr. Albers argued. He argued, and so did Ms. Carroll, that in various cases, federal clients of yours used Title 44 to rationalize why they were going essentially sole source with GPO instead of putting it out to bid.
That is because the federal agencies know that they have a choice. They can either go to the commercial sector or they can come to us. When they make that decision to come to us, they know that they can use a requisition process. That requisition process, however, triggers a competitive procurement solution because we, in fact, outsource all of the components of that card to the rest of the secure credential industry. That creates hundreds of jobs in the community, and that creates multiple business opportunities.
Mr. Albers, why, given what Ms. Vance Cooks just said, why shouldn't the State Department have that option? That's a competitive option. We prefer to go with GPO for various and sundry reasons. If I heard your testimony, you talked about the value of competition and free market, but in a sense, what you want to do is eliminate this potential competition.
Not at all, Congressman. First of all, I apologize for the hyperbole in my testimony. I'll have you know that I was a politician at one point. That might be hard to believe.
You poor guy. Well, that's, as you know, it's very unusual we employ hyperbole up here. But, all right.
So there's a big difference, I think, between what Ms. Vance Cooks is saying and what I'm saying. Number one, we're a system integrator, as is HID. We look to prime contracts with the federal government. Not that we don't mind subcontracting to organizations like GPO. That's a different piece, okay? So I'm not complaining about that. In my testimony, and by the way, I can put this into the record, the State Department responded to us that said we were required to use GPO. And again, in my testimony, we never had an opportunity to even complain about it. So, you know,
And they used Title 44 as the rationale for that.
They did. And they represented the GPO, and I don't have first-hand information, so I want to give Director Vance Cooks, you know, a little bit of leeway here. It's been represented to me that the GPO marketing folks say you have to use this. So I don't know whether that's true or not. I'm sure you probably control that type of communications.
Ms. Vance Cooks, did you want to respond to that?
First of all, the GPO does not have sales teams. I hear that constantly, that we have sales teams and that they're going door to door to these agencies, forcing them to come to us. Nothing could be further from the truth because, first of all, we don't have sales teams. Number two, it is the client and the agencies who are using or stating that we are telling them that. I think all of this started back in 2007 when the public printer at that time stated in a hearing that he felt that secure credentials was in fact something that could be and should be contained in the government. I have been in charge of the GPO since 2012. I have stated unequivocally, publicly as well as privately, that I don't believe that we should be in charge of all of secure credentials. In fact, what I have stated and what the evidence proves is that it is a choice of the federal agencies, and I think they deserve that choice. And all of the evidence points to the fact that we are, in fact, using this as an option. Let me give you some examples. Number one, when there is an RFP out there for a secure credential, you will not find the GPO because we know that the secure credential market compete against themselves. We do not compete for state governments or local government information. What we do is provide a choice for those federal agencies who want a government-to-government solution, and with that government-to-government solution, they get the benefits. And one of the largest benefits, one of the best benefits, is the fact that we don't have shareholder or profit margins. The cost is what they get.
Thank you. My time is up, Mr. Chairman. I would ask unanimous consent that the GAO report dated March 10th, 2015 be entered into the record on this subject.
Without objection, so
I
ordered.
thank the Chair.
Thank you. I'll now recognize myself for 5 minutes. Director, you have an operating budget roughly in the $700 million range, correct?
Yes, sir.
How much of that money is allocated for research and development?
The research and development for secure credentials comes from our competitive procurement with the outside community. We leverage the best of the best.
So how much money do you spend? How many people do you have working on research and development?
We have a few, less than 5 people working on R&D for the secure credential market, if that's what you're referring to.
That's what I'm referring to. I would ask unanimous consent to enter into the record a memo sent on September 30th, 2013. And I want to read part of this. Without objection, so ordered. This is from Daniel Walt. He's at the Departmental Competition Advocate. I mean, he's the competition advocate at the Department of State. And in this letter that is, this email that was sent to Morpho Trust, I'm going to read the middle of it. Federal Acquisition Regulation, FAR, subpart 8.8, requires federal agencies to acquire printing services through GPO unless GPO cannot provide the services. Therefore, we must use GPO for the printing of the passports and the border crossing cards rather than recompete the requirement. Now, that seems to be directly opposite of what you're saying. Can you shed some light on this? I mean, this is, you're saying you're in favor of competition, but at the same time, we have the State Department saying we can't compete this. There can be no competition. Are they wrong or are they right?
I think that if you look at the evidence, the State Department doesn't even believe what they wrote, and I'll tell you why. Because if—
Believe me, that's not the first time that happened.
No. What I'm trying to say, Congressman, is that if the State Department really believed that they had to give all of the secure credential work to the GPO, then we would be doing it. Since that document was written by the competitive advocate, I can assure you that the GPO over here produces the passports and we produce the border crossing card, but Morpho Trust handles the personalization of the border crossing card. HID handles the green card. My point is that people make that statement, but let's look at the facts. And the facts point to the fact that that business is spread across all of the commercial carriers. Not all of that business is with us. I think they say it, but it's not the practice.
And so your opinion of Title of 44, in your opinion, your viewpoint here, that it's really up to the agencies to make that determination. That's the first step, whether or not they're going to compete for it or they're going to give it to GPO, correct?
That is the way it's happening, yes, sir. It is a choice.
But it's their choice. You don't believe it's mandated under the law that they have to use GPO.
It's not practical.
I know, no, but but be specific here. This is a
Yes.
critical point.
Yes.
Is that, under your opinion, under the law, do they have to use you under Title 44?
Under the law, they are allowed the choice of coming to us. We are limited in our capacity to handle all of the work
Okay.
that would be coming through.
Now,
I'm sorry, go ahead.
My time's short.
Sure.
And I think you were very succinct in that answer. I appreciate it. When you say you have no sales force, you do have a bit of a monopoly if you convince somebody to have them come to you. Do you have people that go out to the agencies and say, this is what you should be doing, or this is what we recommend, or this is what you can do? I mean, that in part is the sales force, correct?
No, that in part is an account management. We have an account management group, and they are responsible for taking care of the clients that we currently have. What we have been hearing is that we have been accused of having salespeople who go out and tell people, you must come to us. That is not true. That is a fabrication. I'd like to also, if I have some time, to go back to the R&D question. I want to make sure that this committee realizes that the GPO is in the business of outsourcing all of its requirements. And when we outsource our requirements, that means that we leverage the best technology across the world, across the United States, and we do not have proprietary interest in one versus the other. That is to the benefit of the stakeholder. That is to the benefit of the taxpayer.
My time's expired, and I'll yield back, and now recognize the gentleman from California, Mr. Liu, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I personally don't have a problem with the U.S. Government Publishing Office publishing U.S. government documents and credentials. And this is an issue that both Democratic and Republicans in Congress have reaffirmed. So, Director Vance Cooks, let me ask you a few questions. The GPO was authorized by Congress to print passports in 1926, is that correct?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And then around 2005, the GPO began producing passports with more advanced technology at the request of the State Department, is that correct?
Yes, sir.
And specifically, you began to print passports with embedded RFID chips, correct?
Yes, sir.
And then Congress has continued to authorize GPO to print passports with these chips, correct?
Yes, sir.
All right. And during the GPO strategic planning, in fact, Congress weighed in to authorize GPO to expand its services and provide secure identification cards for the Department of Homeland Security and the Social Security Administration in 2007 and again in 2012. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Then let me just ask you this question, because the chairman did raise a good point. I just want to understand. Does a GPO or Congress force agencies to print with the GPO?
No, sir.
Okay. So now I have a sort of a different question. It's more for the entire panel. RFID technology can be read at a distance, right? You have these readers that can read this, and that means not only can government read these cards at a distance, but so can criminals and other folks. So I'm just sort of curious, what kind of precautions should people who have these cards take so that these cards aren't read at a distance by, let's say, a criminal? I've gone to department stores where they sell these wallets that say you buy this wallet and you can stop your RFID chip from being read at a distance. Do people need to buy those wallets? Are these wallets a gimmick? Can you sort of tell me there are security issues going on with that?
So we build in a number of security protections for what we call personal identifiable information. Mr. Mica was talking about that. In the case of the passport card, there's a pointer to your file that only the CBP would have. So there is no personal identifiable information on that chip. It's only a pointer to your file. So when you're approaching the border with that card, the CBP officer can pull up your file and know that you're the person that's supposed to be there. So there really is there's no security threat in that application. You mentioned the protection from the RF chip. The BCC and the passport card come with a little sleeve, actually. So, but that's a passive chip. So there's no radiation. There's nothing coming out of that chip. You can't turn it on or off. It's just there, like your E-ZPass. I mean, it's there and it's read when you go through.
Thank you.
I'd like to add that not all RFID technology can be read from a distance. So, for example, in your U.S. passport, that cannot be read from a distance. You have to be in the same plane and within just a few inches of a reader. The shock there is that the U.S. passport has a chip in it. It is not being read. That chip, the electronics in that document are not being read. Only the optical portion of it is. So the U.S. taxpayer is paying lots of money for a passport with the chip in it. It's not making them any more secure because that chip is not being read at the border.
What's the chip for, if it's not being read?
It's an ICAO standard. The chip is in the U.S. passport and 27 of the visa waiver countries as well, to make the document more secure. The chip is highly resistant to counterfeiting, and so that's why they did that.
But it does meet the ICAO standards, and that is the most critical component.
Thank you. I yield back.
Thank the gentleman. Now recognize the gentleman from North Carolina, Mr. Meadows, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank each of you for your testimony. Director, I understand you're saying that you've got 5 R&D. The chairman was asking you 5 R&D people that are working on the integration. Is that correct?
We actually have a Secure Innovation Credential Center, and it's a group of individuals who are responsible for looking at counterfeiting technologies and testing. But they work very closely with the private sector for that. And I think it's a great question because I want to emphasize again, we're closely tied to the private sector for all of that. We even work with the Department of Homeland Security for all the fraudulent testing in the labs.
All right, so let me follow up, Mr. Almers. Let me maybe come to you and ask you to give an opinion on that, because one of the concerns I have is when we look at integration, you can take wonderful pieces of technology, and as you try to integrate them and make them practical and noteworthy, it doesn't produce the end result. So would you comment on what you're hearing? Is that an effective way, or?
So I have no personal information that GPO isn't an adequate systems integrator, okay? My comment before about systems integration is that it's a much different task than, being a prime contractor. We want the opportunity, and I think HID does too, to be a prime contractor, be the systems integrator. So the fact that the GPO...
Well, let me rephrase it. What kind of issues can arise from an integration standpoint that would make it less secure?
Last word, I'm sorry.
Less secure.
So, just like the GPO, any system integrator goes out to look at third party, and we have a complete supply chain management system, and we pick the best of the best. So when we work with a customer on requirements, for example, for the passport card, we look to build in security features such as watermarks, such as chips themselves. We outsource all that stuff, and our supply chain management manages all that stuff. There is risk in all that part of the process.
Sure.
So the system integrator manages that process. So, Lockheed and Northrop and all the other ones in town, they do the same thing. So I'm not sure I'm answering your question, though.
All right.
I'd like to respond a little bit. He's absolutely correct. It's an ecosystem. But let's look at the Trusted Traveler Program cards, which is what we produce as a printer and a card integrator. One of the ways to determine that we are doing a good job is the read rate. And the read rate for that particular card is between 80 and 90%. So there are different metrics that you can use to choose whether or not your product is doing exactly what it's supposed to and whether or not it is meeting the specs.
And I agree with that. But let me ask you that from a matrix, with GPO, how do you compare to the private sector in terms of read rates and all that? I mean, do you compare that kind of data to see how effective you are? I see somebody behind you's nodding yes.
Yes, I know. We're proud.
Okay.
We're proud. We have data to prove that our read rates for our cards are very, very good.
All right. So let me in the time I have remaining, let's talk about Title 44, and it sounds like that there is maybe some ambiguity in terms of the requirement. Director, are you willing to send out a letter to all the agencies that says that they're not required to use you for their printing to fix this ambiguity? Because that's what you were saying, that it is not really a requirement, but indeed some of the testimony has said that the State Department in particular believes that it is a requirement. So are you willing to correct the record, I guess, coming from your position?
What I'm willing to do is what I've always been doing up to this point, which is to let everyone know that it is a choice and we respect it.
So yes or no, would you be willing to send out something to the agencies that said they're not required to use GPO for so you are willing to?
I am willing to send a letter to say that it is a choice because that is the way it has always been.
Okay. And so
it is a practical business.
So do you think the ambiguity that's out there is just someone that happens to misunderstand Title 44, or is it inherent in Title 44?
I think that the Title 44 specifically states that all printing must come to the GPO. What I am trying to say, and I think I'm being very articulate about it.
You are very articulate, by the way.
Thank you very much.
Thank
All
you.
right, appreciate that. What I am saying, though, is that in practical application and in true business sense, what's really happening, sir, is that it is a choice. Not everyone even comes to the GPO for printing.
Okay, in the 6 seconds that I have left,
Yes.
let me finish with this, is I would ask that you try to clear up some of the
Yes.
ambiguity. Understand that I don't want you subsidizing and competing with the private sector, nor do I want the private sector coming in and taking over if you can do it more effectively. I'll be your advocate on that. As a business guy, I want to be. The other thing, it's a pebble in my shoe. When you have law enforcement officers sitting in cars outside your office, it doesn't give the impression of efficiency. I don't understand why the printing office would have their own fleet of law enforcement cars, so if you would address that. I'll do that.
You're not, excuse me,
I
really-
walk by him all the time.
No,
Now,
I
he's
know you
not
do.
sleeping half the time, so
Well,
that's good.
Half the time, you better
No,
not be
I'm
sleeping
kidding.
at all. No, would you believe it's in Title 44 that we must have our own police force?
Well, we may need, Mr. Chairman, to look at changing Title 44. I'll yield
All
back.
right, all right.
Thank the gentleman. Now recognize the gentleman from Georgia, Mr. Carter, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank all of you for being here. We appreciate your participation. Ms. Vance Hooks, I want to ask you, it's my understanding that GPO produces the TWIC cards for DHS and for TSA. Is that correct?
Yes.
I have 2 ports in my district, the Port of Savannah, Georgia, and the Port of Brunswick, Georgia. And of course, they utilize the TWIC cards. And it's my understanding that they've reported significant delays in both the renewal and the initial application. And I'm just wondering, is there a problem here? Is there a problem with producing the cards?
Are you referring to a recent statement? Because when we took over several months ago, we had a backlog. Now, let me be clear. We just took over that business, and that was, I believe, in May or June of 2014. And when we took over that book of business, we had a backlog that we had to clear up. It is my understanding, sir, and I need to check, that things have been going very well since then.
Okay,
But prior to that, they did have significant backlogs, but that was with another carrier.
Well, it's my understanding that they've had a backlog and that there
Yes.
are problems. So
Right.
if you could check into that, I would
will.
sincerely appreciate it, because
Sure.
this, of course, is commerce, and this is a problem, and a big problem in our district. So
Sure, I'll be happy to do that, but I want to be clear that we did inherit the backlog back in June, but we made good efforts to reduce that backlog, and I know this for a fact because I was heavily involved in it.
okay, can you describe some of those efforts to
Sure. When we began to launch, we ran into a problem with the speed rate of the information coming across. And this is a really good example of how well we work with the private sector, because we work with GDIT on this. And GDIT put all of their best people on it, innovation, creativity. They worked diligently for weeks to make sure that they could correct that speed rate. So I'll check on that for you.
Okay, well, I appreciate that very much. Can you tell me, when you get the request for the Twix cards, is it just through some kind of agency form, or, I mean, how does that happen?
Right. It's called a requisition form, a standard Form 1 for printing and binding requisition. And this requisition form recognizes that a secure credential is a printed product. So it has a lot of questions on there about the pre-press work and all of the specific requirements that are attached to it. And then there's an MOU attached to it. Once we get that requisition form, then we issue, or it is triggering, a competitive procurement across the entire secure credential industry for all of the components and the products to make that
Okay, so
credential.
when DHS or when TSA orders these cards, do you have any oversight over it? Do you?
Yes, we have complete oversight over it, as well as the agency.
Okay.
The agency works with us 100% of the time.
If they order more cards than they need, do you send them?
They give us the order about what they need, and then we respond. We only produce what they tell us to produce.
But do you have any oversight about whether they are ordering the number of cards that they need? I'm concerned about the security here.
I
If
would-
there are excess cards being generated.
Okay, they give us an order for X number of cards, we produce them. They have their own oversight where they are responsible for those cards once we deliver it to them, and that's the point.
Okay, so you're just following the order. If it says, give me 100 cards, you're sending 100 cards.
That is correct.
No oversight on that whatsoever,
The
no
ov-
security clearance?
No. The oversight is on the production of the cards and taking care of those cards from the moment that we create them to the moment that we transport them to the facility of TWIC. Once TWIC takes ownership, that is their problem.
Okay, so if there are excess cards that have been generated, it's not your fault, you're just filling the order.
If there are excess cards, it's on their end, sir.
Okay, well, getting back to the delays that they've experienced, tell me about the FAR, what's referred to as the FAR procedures. Do you implement those? Do you utilize those procedures?
We follow the MMAR, and the MMAR closely mirrors the FAR. In fact, it's almost like the FAR, but it closely models it.
Why would you choose one over the other?
Because we're a legislative branch agency and we don't follow the FAR. It's written in law. So once
It's written in law that you're not to follow the FAR?
Section 8.8 exempts printing from the FAR. Therefore, the MMAR was developed to closely mirror and model the FAR.
Okay, but we still have the backlog. If you can please check into that,
Oh,
I would
yes.
appreciate it very much. We need to know.
Absolutely.
This is very important.
Sure.
Thank you, and I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, sir.
Thank the gentleman. Now recognize the gentleman from North Carolina, Mr. Walker, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Apologize for my tardiness coming from a markup from another committee hearing, but I did have a couple things I wanted to address. First of all, let me thank you for the hospitality and all your staff there, Andy, Mike, Steve, and the guys, helping me understand a little bit of the process over there and what you guys are working on. My question is, in your statement, and you may have covered this, but I wanted to make sure that I'm clear on it, that you say federal agencies approach GPO asking your agency to do work for them. I think we talked about that a little bit yesterday. Are you saying that the GPO itself does not reach out to federal agencies to sell, quote, their products and services GPO wants to produce? Can you expound on that for a little bit?
Certainly. 2 points. The first point is that we do not have a sales team. Everyone keeps saying that we have a sales team. We don't have one. That's number one. I think people also should understand that the customers that we have for secure credentials are the same ones that we have for printing. They understand our function, they understand our capabilities. So they know that we can produce secure credentials.
Okay. Do you have people who market your services in competition with the private sector companies? I know you
No.
don't have salespeople, but would you say you have?
We do not have sales teams, we do not have marketers. We have people who can respond to inquiries if an agency contacts us. It is not unusual for an agency to contact us. And as you and I talked about yesterday when you visited, and thank you again for visiting us, the question is not whether or not GPO can respond. The question is what makes an agency decide that they should come and talk to us about secure credentials. Because as you and I talked yesterday, it takes a lot of effort, a lot of resources, and a lot of time for an agency to make a change in a commercial carrier that they currently have. Why do they go to that trouble? Is there a problem with the product quality? Is there a problem with the read rate? What is pushing them to talk to the GPO? Because we have the consultant expertise, we can help them with that solution. But we do not tell them, you must come to us. But I have to say that in the 8 years that we have been producing secure credentials, not one of those clients has left us. We do very good work.
Can you go a little deeper and maybe explain how you engage in these business development activities, just for the record, that we would understand how this breaks out, how it flows, and how you keep these for 8 years?
Well, let's say that let's start at the beginning. If an agency is having a problem with a carrier, and let's say they're having a problem with the read rate, they currently do business with us anyway through printing. They'll talk to us about it. They'll ask us, can you do better? And we'll ask them, what is it that you're looking for? Sometimes they'll even ask us for a prototype. We can produce a prototype, and if that prototype works, then they'll have further discussions with us. There's constant conversation back and forth about their requirements, about their specifications, and we can provide it. But as I explained to you yesterday, the way in which we provide service to the client is by outsourcing all of that. I want to be clear that we're using the R&D and the innovation that the rest of the secure credential industry has, bringing it all together as an integrator into the GPO. And as you had said, Mr. Albers, we're an integrator. That's what we do.
So final question. So basically, you're making a case, and I want to put words in your mouth, that you compete on a level playing field with the private sector through the federal requisition regulations or FAR. Is that a fair statement, or would you like to expound on it?
The fair statement is that we competitively procure the products and services that we need from the private sector to build the best card that we can. It is competitive, it is a procurement, and it satisfies the stakeholders at a low rate, a very low price, because again, we can only charge actual cost.
Thank you, Ms. Vance-Cooks. I yield back.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you. I appreciate that. We'll now recognize the gentleman from Georgia, Mr. Heiss, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Albers, let me begin with you. In your opinion, how open and transparent would you say the requisition process is at GPO when it comes to these credential cards as it relates to FAR, which you have to abide by?
I would say the answer is not open and transparent at all. I mean, our personal experience is that we don't compete as a system integrator with GPO. We're not allowed to. The agency decides to go to GPO, that's fine, or they decide to go to the private sector. If they go to the private sector, typically they have an RFI, they have an RFP, they have industry days. We have an opportunity to bid on those programs, those contracts. We compete with one another, and that drives down the cost.
So you're saying once it goes to GPO that the private vendors no longer are allowed to compete at all?
Not as a system integrator, no.
Okay.
As the director said, GPO uses industry, including some of us, to supply them as a subcontractor.
And would you agree, too, that in that process that if it goes to GPO as opposed to private vendors, the lack of innovation, competition, and a host of other factors go out the door as well?
Well, absolutely. I mean, we don't get an opportunity to compete with one another. So GPO, and I'm sure has the best interest of the taxpayer at heart, but you know, we're capitalists, so we have to get to where we need to be competitive.
Okay. Director, how did GPO end up producing the border crossing cards from the State Department, the requisition process?
The State Department expressed some concern about problems they were having with the card. And it goes back to my earlier statement, what causes an agency to come to us, to talk to us about their card? Because it's a lot of work, it's a lot of issues. And they asked us to make a prototype, and we did. That prototype works very well. And then they asked us to perform some other things, and that's how it started. But let me just say something else. Mr. Albers talked about the lack of innovation. Because of the fact that the GPO procures through a competitive process, all of the components, the service, the consultation, fabrication, materials to create the product, it means that we are leveraging the best of the best innovation and R&D
Well, I would
throughout
think
the
that
industry.
would be fair to say that that's your opinion, but other private vendors out there don't have that same opinion because they're not allowed to even be a part of the process. How did you arrive at a card price for the BCCs?
There are 4 components to our price: labor, overhead, capital investment, and materials. And we are only allowed to charge those 4 components.
And what was the cost?
For the border crossing card, I think it's about 601. Sorry, 601.
Okay. Just by curiosity, Ms. Carroll, Mr. Albers, did either of your groups have a price in mind? I mean, were you all able to go through the process and come up with a price that may have been different from GPO?
So actually, before Kathleen answers, we did not have an opportunity. As you probably know, under the FAR, there is something called a cure notice. So if there is an issue, you get an opportunity to cure, and we were not given that opportunity. So
you don't know what it would have cost you to produce the cards?
Oh, we know now. I mean, we continue to produce the passport card, and we just bid on the green card versus HID.
And what was the difference in your price and GPOs?
So we bid on the U.S. green card. That green card has significant enhancements in security features. It has 2 holograms. It has a window in it with stars. It has tons of security features, in addition to our read rates for the RFID is around 98%, okay?
Compared to?
Compared to 80 to 90%, okay? Now, do you know how much we charge for the green card? $2 and... What is it? $2.50, sorry.
We bid $2.99, by the way.
Same kind of card, or this
So the
one's
cost
better.
would be in the ballpark,
It
the
should be,
savings?
yeah.
Okay, and also with less problems?
Absolutely.
Okay, let me, Director, I know the time's going away, but as our understanding that there were some problems, what happens when a card is not reading properly? Or is there the ability to rebuild the card, reissue it, or do they have to be destroyed if a card is not reading
Well,
properly?
if a card is not reading properly, then those cards are returned to us.
And what do you do with them?
And then we determine what the problem is, and in some cases, we would destroy them. But let me go back to what they just said. I want to make sure.
No, let's
we're
not do that.
Okay.
Do you have quality assurance before
Yes.
you send cards out?
Yes, sir.
Okay, and y'all do too, difference between the quality assurance? I'm curious, and I know my time's expired, so however you want to handle this.
If
Jeff.
you could help us to get back to understand the process that you go through, I'd appreciate it. It would take some time, I'm sure, to explain it. So if you could provide that to us, it'd be great. We'll now recognize the gentlewoman from Wyoming, Ms. Lummis, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I want to thank our panel for being here today. My first question is for the Inspector General. As a result of your audits, what problems have you found with GPO's contracting processes, and what do you recommend to improve them?
We've done quite a bit of work with contracting. One of the contracts that we did review was with the Passport e-covers. And as we went through that process to see if GPO followed its own practices, we found that there were several problems with that internally in terms of approval processes, having boards review things. We found problems with testing, inconsistency in determining what a test result meant. We also found that there were problems with the roles and responsibilities. When the contracting process requires a board to review the proposals, we found that maybe one person was doing it opposed to a board, in which we would have seen a board review it, we would have said okay, because you had a lot of people having input into it, making a decision, versus one person. We had allegations of steering of contract also, so we looked at that, and we didn't find a problem with that either.
That you did identify been cured by the agency?
Acquisitions right now at GPO still has quite a few open recommendations.
And is there a procedure by which you follow up with the agency to close those open issues?
Yeah, our procedure is, as we produce an audit report and management either agrees or disagrees with the recommendation, then that goes on our books in terms of open recommendations as being unresolved. And as management works through the process of corrective action, they would send us proof that they took corrective action, and then we would verify it, and then we would close the recommendation.
Okay, so there are still areas of open recommendations because the agency has not gotten back to you. Is that correct?
Yeah, overall, GPO is very responsive to our recommendations. Their chief of staff heads it up. They monitor it closely. They put it into performance standards so that senior managers are held accountable for recommendations, talk about it frequently. They have very few open recommendations right now compared to other organizations because they do actively manage it.
Okay, thank you. Director, I have a couple questions for you, and this is not my area of expertise. I've done requests for proposals as a agency head in state government, so I know the challenges. But I've never done them for secure cards. So I have some questions related to that. Where do the chips and component parts of the secure credentials come from, and how are they obtained?
Okay. The secure chips, the materials, the supplies, the fabrication, consultation, design, all of those components come from the private sector. And it depends entirely on what the specifications are for that particular agency.
Okay, do some of those component parts come from locations abroad?
Most of them come from America. Because we are in the MMAR, we follow the Buy American Act.
Are there though some that come from
I would say
abroad?
that probably some.
And how do you vet a foreign provider?
We have a we have an intense audit process for our vendors, but again, most of them are coming from the United States, and they all go through the same audit process. These vendors have to prove to us that they have the best technology and the best components that can be used in the credentials, and we follow them throughout the entire cycle as well. We also visit their factories too, considerable on-site visits.
So tell me how you can be assured and assure us that components are not compromised.
Because of the audit process and the testing process. We also have a tight relationship with the Department of Homeland Security ICE program, whereby they test all of these products for us. They make sure that these technologies are exacting up to the standards, and we have appropriate testing for them. And that's a great question. I'd love to respond to that in writing as well, to give you some assurance.
I would love to see your response in
Thank you.
writing. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Mr. Chairman, just a clarification. It's perfectly fair to ask Ms. Vance Cooks about foreign production and security of components. The private sector also uses foreign vendors.
Yes,
and
they
the
do.
same question would apply to them. Thank you.
We'll now recognize the gentleman from,
If my time hadn't expired, maybe I would have gone there.
We'll now recognize the gentleman from Wisconsin for 5 minutes.
Yeah, I'll give another question to the director. You've got these global entry cards, okay? And maybe I just don't understand this. It seems to me normally if I'd cross the border, I'd have a passport. Could you explain to me what the upside of these cards is or what their purpose is?
Well, we have the Nexus, the Sentry, and the Global Entry cards. I believe the Global Entry cards are for expedited movement through the system. The Nexus cards are for those people going to Canada, and the Sentry cards are for those people going to Mexico. And so the State Department has just identified, CBMP, that there are these different cards that you can use.
Okay. If I have a passport, I can't get to Mexico or Canada? Doesn't that trump everything?
Well, I think a passport trumps everything, yes. This is just for those particular people who might want to use that card.
Okay, what is it? Do they have a reader or something? You can just
There are readers for all of those cards, sir.
Okay, so in other words, if I have a passport, I might want a global entry card just because it means I can...
Well, I mean, you can go across the border and you can flash the card. It goes to the reader. I think Mr. Albers identified the fact that there's a secure identification code that hits the reader, and you can just have expedited processing through. With a passport, though, as you know, you have to go right in front of the reader.
Okay, how many global entry cards a year do you guys produce?
I don't know just the global entry. I just know that for the entire program up to this point, we've done about 5 million since inception. I can give you the specifics for each one for the record.
Okay. You have another card, a District of Columbia identification.
It's a DC-1 card.
Yeah, what's the purpose of that?
I believe it's just for the people to use to get on the bus. Is that what it's for? Schools, buses, is that.
And how do you guys get involved in that?
They asked us if we would produce the card, and it doesn't cost that much. It's a very low program card.
Okay, so you kind of contract yourself out to local units of government?
No, it's just that we are allowed to provide printing to the DC government, but no other local government.
Okay. Now, there's a cost variance between the DHS Trusted Traveler Program card and the Border Crossing card. How, like, there's a more than 2-to-1 difference in price. How does that happen?
Well, it happens because they're different cards for different processes. Now, remember, when you have these different cards, each agency is responsible for working with us to identify the specifications for that card, and we look at each component, and they might tell us they want holograms, or they might want a different type of secure credential feature. And so one card may be more expensive than the other, depending upon what the agency wants. And so what we can do is just give them the appropriate pricing for that. They make those decisions. We do not.
Okay. And just to digress, you said you got about 5 million.
Year to date, with the Trusted Traveler cards. But you've asked me specifically for how many are in Global Entry and how many are in Nexus. I have to go back and get that information for you and send it to you.
Total combined is 5 million?
Yes, sir.
This year
Since-
so far
no.
alone?
Since '08, it's 5 million. He wants to know how many this year.
This year, it's typically
About 1.5 million this year,
Okay. And how long do these things last?
10 years.
Okay, so you figure if we're already at 1.5 million this year, maybe 2 million a year?
Maybe.
So in a period of 10 years, 20 million?
It might.
Okay. Okay, thanks. I yield the remainder of my time.
If the gentleman yield before he, let's go back to Global Entry. You've been a great witness, but I think you overstepped on the Global Entry.
I did.
Global Entry is worthless. There's not a single thing that that card does. Now, if I'm wrong, tell me. Anybody on this panel knows what the Global Entry card that is issued does, tell me. And there's not a single reader, because it doesn't do anything. Am I wrong on that? The Global Entry program, but it requires a passport. But when I got my Global Entry card, I tried to use it, and they just laughed. They just like, I said, well, what's this for? And they said, well, nothing. It's sort of like my Wendy's, get a free burger after you do 10 trips, to get a Frosty.
You're asking me.
But I don't even get a Frosty, so.
All right, well, I'm sorry you didn't get a Frosty.
Yes.
Okay, but you're asking me about the purpose of the card, which is in fact the agency's response. If you're asking me, what does that card do and how good is it? We are responsible for producing the card according to the specifications that the agency has identified. That is what we do. Now, if you are concerned about what their use is or anything like that, I can't explain.
Just a word of caution again, I think you've been an excellent witness. I got more confidence in you, in the agency based on your testimony today in general, but there are no readers. It does nothing. It is a waste of time. And when you say that you're partners and fully integrated every step of the way, we're going to hold you partly accountable for producing a product that serves absolutely no purpose other than cost a lot of money.
And I will take that back to the agency. Thank you, sir.
And believe me, we will continue to press them on that point.
All right.
Does anybody else want to shed any light on the, I see some interest here. Ms. Carroll, Mr. Albers?
Well, you're right on the Global Entry card. You use your fingerprints when you come in. You don't need the card at all. In fact, I've lost mine, so it doesn't do any but that's not the fault of the director. I got to tell you, I think he's right about that.
Yes, there's no photo ID on it. There's no biometrics. You can't use it at TSA. I really struggle to understand, and I guess that's part of what we're looking for GPO, if you are partners, is to understand why in the world do we do this card. But the primary responsibility, you're right, is with those that are issuing or doing the program. But I just wanted to clarify that. I will now recognize, thank you for the time, we'll now recognize the gentleman from Alabama, Mr. Palmer, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This year's Black Hat Convention featured a $10 device called BLE Key that purports to circumvent the RFID cards by exploiting vulnerabilities in the VGAN communication protocol. Once the vulnerability is exposed, an individual can clone the RFID-equipped cards. And according to its researchers, it can be installed in less than 2 minutes. And this is a question to you, Ms. Vance Cooks. Are you aware of this?
Am I aware of the Black Hat?
Are you aware that that there's a group out there that claims that they can clone RFID cards and they can be installed in less than 2 minutes?
I am not aware of that particular one, but I'm aware of a move underfoot by so many different organizations trying to clone different components of the card, yes. I can assure you, I know in terms of the passport, I'd heard something about that. None of our cards, and we produced 100 million e-passports, none of those have been compromised.
How about you, Ms. Carroll?
Yes, HID Global is fully aware of that. We actually attend those conferences because we need to understand exactly what the black hat folks are. Maybe they're good guys, but the bad guys are paying attention, and they're learning from these kinds of things as well. And so HID Global and companies like Morpho, too, we invest millions and millions of dollars every year in R&D to stay ahead of the bad guys. The RUS Green Card, we have been making it since 1998. It has never been successfully compromised.
I'm glad that you're aware of it, and I hope that the GPO will get up to speed on this. And I'd like to know what is being done to install safeguards against RFID cloning. Is this I think it ought to be a top priority.
If I could, Congressman?
Yes.
I think Ms. Carroll's point is well taken, that we don't just take orders, okay? We stay ahead of the curve. And I'm talking about industry, not just Morpho Trust. So we are aware of those. We're aware of the defrauders. I mean, when cards were coming from China, we bought them, and we tried to figure out what they're doing. And we put that company out of business, all of us. So, there is a reason to keep industry in the game as much as you can, because we're following those trends. It's all well and good that an agency can go to another government agency and buy a product from an organization that doesn't charge a profit. But we build that into everything that we make. Every new card, every new biometric, every new software or hardware product that we make, we're looking at the trends of the industry and we're trying to stay ahead of them.
May I interject, please?
Yes.
Okay, I've just been advised, and I want to make sure for the record that I've been advised that we do send people to Black Hat as well.
Okay.
So I want to characterize that for the committee. And secondly, I don't think that people should walk away believing that we just take orders. That's not the GPO. The GPO works closely with agencies. We want to serve the agencies, and we do that by working with them to make sure that they have the best product possible available in the marketplace.
My point in this is to make sure that GPO is aware that there are groups out there that can clone these cards, and that you're taking necessary safeguards to make sure that doesn't happen.
You're correct, sir, and I should have answered it correctly. We do send people to the Black Hat. They are aware of it.
Thank you very much for
Thank you for letting me clarify that.
Clarification. One last question, and that is, Ms. Vance Cooks, that you conducted an audit in which a component of the passport e-cover failed a specific test. And according to the audit report, the e-cover failed the read-time test for several sample products. The solicitation stated that if a product was given a fail at any point, the proposal would be deemed technically unacceptable and would not receive further consideration, yet the products were determined to be technically acceptable with no documented explanation. Can you explain this discrepancy?
Sure. In fact, the IG report is very good in detailing that. A couple of points. Number one, the bidder in question submitted a very, very good product, not a very good product, very good price. But unfortunately, that product did not work. And according to the specifications, we had to fail that product, and therefore the vendor was not part of it. We did not adequately document the part about the read rates, and that is what the IG has referred to, that we need to do a better job documenting what is critical and what is not. And believe me, we appreciate what he wrote, and we have made a lot of changes in our acquisitions to make sure that the next ones are very tightly controlled in terms of what works, what doesn't work, and what happens. It was a learning lesson for us. It would not have changed the decision, but we do need to make sure that we tighten our documentation.
My time has expired. I do appreciate your answers, though. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Now I recognize the gentleman from Virginia, Mr. Conley.
I just wanted to say, Mr. Chairman, rarely in the history of Congress is there a hearing that exhaustively, comprehensively addresses one discrete issue? I think we've done that here today. But it has raised some very interesting questions, and I certainly look forward to working with you on re-examining Title 44 to make sure that we're not doing unwittingly harm to the ability of industry to compete, and that we still allow room for choice for federal agencies with respect to GPO. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank the gentleman. One last question for the Inspector General. You've looked at this. You've issued, like you said, I think 10 reports. What's your biggest concern?
The biggest concern when I start looking at all of this is there's a couple things. The acquisition process. The acquisition process is flawed right now, and I know GPO is working diligently to make corrective actions. And then secondly, when I look at the technology associated with it, I see that there is no intercoordination within the GPO in terms of like leveraging the expertise from the CIO shop. And I think that I spoke with the CIO yesterday, and he's working on a more collaborative, more involvement in the IT and the security aspect of the secure credentials and the e-covers.
We want to thank not only you as the Inspector General, but all the people that work in the various IG offices. We have a lot of good men and women who spend a lot of time, months, sometimes years, working on these issues. It's imperative that we, on both sides of the aisle, get that information. We would ask you to also keenly look at this concern that we have about how Title 44 is interpreted. Part of the reason we held this hearing is we do anticipate potentially rewriting that statute. And as we do so, I want to make sure we get the maximum input and any flaws or things that we might see there. I do appreciate, Director, the candid discussion we've had. It's an important part of the process. And appreciate the good work that so many of the men and women who work down there. They do a critical, important thing. You've got to produce a great product at the end of the day. I do think we can, your comments will go a long way to making sure that these agencies know that they do have a choice. And to Mr. Albers and Ms. Carroll, we appreciate the good work you've done. You got a lot of good employees and people who are doing important work. The millions of dollars that is spent on research and development cannot be dismissed. Those are real costs that a GPO, for instance, wouldn't go through, but also provides the next wave of technology that can make sure that we have the most secure documentation we can possibly have. So, again, I appreciate the productive hearing. I appreciate you all being here with us today. The committee now stands adjourned.
Thank you.